You've read the stories. The blind man sees. The storm goes quiet. The dead man walks out of a tomb. And if you're like most people, you've heard these miracles told like isolated episodes, like they happened in random order, scattered across 4 Gospels with no connection between them. But what if I told you there's a sequence? What if every miracle Jesus performed was building towards something? And the order they happened in reveals a pattern most people have never noticed. Because when you lay all of them out from the very first to the very last, something extraordinary emerges. Jesus wasn't just healing people. He wasn't just proving he was powerful. He was telling a story with every single miracle. And that story has a beginning, a middle, and an end that changes how you understand everything he did. Here's what makes this fascinating. Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell the story of Jesus from similar angles, which is why scholars call them the Synoptic Gospels. Those 3 primarily use the Greek word dunamis to describe what we call miracles. Dunamis means raw power, inherent ability, a force that can't be stopped. It's where we get the English word dynamic. When Matthew or Mark describe Jesus casting out a demon or calming a storm, they're saying this is dunamis. This is power being unleashed. But the Gospel of John never uses that word, not once. John exclusively uses the Greek word shonin, which means sign, and that distinction matters more than you'd think. A dunamis makes you go, wow, that's incredible. Semeion makes you ask, wait, what does that point to? John 20, IEs 30-31 tells us exactly why he chose that word. Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. Every miracle was evidence. Every healing was a signature. Every act of power was a signpost pointing somewhere, specific to who Jesus actually is. And there's a third word the New Testament uses, Teras, meaning wonder or prodigy, describing the effect these events had on people who witnessed them. So when Acts 22 says God accredited Jesus by miracles, wonders, and signs, it's using all 3 Greek words in one sentence. Dunamis, Teras, and Semeion, power, astonishment, and meaning. That's the triple lens through which every miracle of Jesus needs to be understood. The Old Testament had its own vocabulary for this. The Hebrew O means sign and met means wonder, a word that carries the idea of something so conspicuous, so unmistakable that you can't look away from it. These 2 words travel together throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, appearing side by side in Exodus, Deuteronomy, Nehemiah, Jeremiah. When God brought Israel out of Egypt, Deuteronomy 26-8 says he did it with signs and wonders. The miracles of Jesus aren't a new category. They're the continuation of the same God doing what he's always done, revealing himself through acts that carry meaning far deeper than the surface event. So let's walk through them chronologically and let's watch the story unfold. The very first miracle happens at a wedding, and that matters more than most people realize. John 2, E's 1-1. Jesus, his mother, and his disciples are at a wedding feast in Cana of Galilee, a region in northern Israel. Archaeologists, led by Dr. Tom McCullough, have been excavating a site called Cana, about 12 kilometers northwest of Nazareth, and they found possible evidence this may be the actual location, including an underground veneration complex with crosses carved into walls and Greek inscriptions referencing Lord Jesus, plus a shelf carved into bedrock with space for 6 large stone vessels. The identification isn't settled among scholars, but the findings are intriguing. Now here's a detail that hides in plain sight. John opens this story with the words, "on the 3rd day." Most people read past it, but John doesn't waste words. The 3rd day in Jewish thought carries the weight of resolution of God showing up when things seem finished. It's the day Abraham saw the mountain where he'd offer Isaac, Genesis 22-4. It's the day Jonah came out of the fish, and it's the day Jesus would walk out of a tomb. The very first miracle is tagged with a time stamp that points to the resurrection. In first-century Jewish culture, a wedding celebration lasted up to a week. Running out of wine wasn't just embarrassing. It was a breach of hospitality that could bring shame on the entire family. Mary tells Jesus, "They have no wine." His response, "My hour has not yet come," is loaded. In John's Gospel, the hour always refers to the cross. John 12:23, John 17:1. So even here, at the very first miracle, the shadow of the cross is present. Mary's last recorded words in all of Scripture are stunning in their simplicity. Do whatever he tells you. Now here's what the English translation buries. John tells us there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding roughly 20 to 30 gall. Stone jars were used because, unlike clay pots, they couldn't become ritually unclean under Jewish law. To be ceremonially unclean meant you were temporarily cut off from worship, from community, from the presence of God. Not because of personal sin, but because something about your physical condition or contact puts you outside the boundary of ritual purity. Leviticus 6:28. Leviticus 11:33-34. These weren't random containers. They were the instruments of the old purification system, and Jesus fills them to the brim and turns their contents into something entirely new. The water that could only wash the outside becomes wine that represents joy, celebration, covenant. John calls this the first of his signs and says it revealed his glory. The very first miracle is a picture of transformation. The old system, good but incomplete, gives way to something overflowing and abundant. And there's more hiding in the numbers. 6 jars, not 7. In the Bible, 7 is the number of completion, the number of creation finished. 6 is one short. It's almost there, but not quite. The jars are full of ritual water, but they're not enough. And Jesus doesn't add a 7th jar. He transforms what's already there. The prophet Joel had spoken of a coming day when the mountains shall drip with wine, and all the stream beds of Judah shall flow with water. Joel 3:18. That day has arrived. The Messianic age, the era the prophet said God would step in and restore everything, isn't announced in a temple or on a throne. It begins at a party where the best wine is saved for last. The second miracle is also recorded only in John 4, EAs 43-54. A royal official in Capernaum has a son who's dying. He travels to find Jesus and begs him to come heal the boy. Jesus says, "Go, your son will live," and the man believes the word before he sees the evidence. He goes home and on the road. His servants meet him with the news. The boy recovered at the exact hour Jesus spoke. This is the second sign, and it introduces something the first miracle didn't: distance. Jesus doesn't touch the boy. He doesn't visit the house. He speaks, and reality changes miles away. From here, Jesus' ministry explodes in Galilee. Luke 5, Es 4-11 records the miraculous catch of fish where Peter, after fishing all night and catching nothing, obeys Jesus' command to cast his net on the other side. The catch is so massive it begins to break the nets and nearly sinks 2 boats. Peter falls to his knees. "Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." It's not the fish that undoes Peter. It's the realization of who's standing in his boat. Something about the sheer excess of the catch makes Peter feel the weight of his own smallness. Remember this moment, because we'll come back to another catch of fish at the very end of the story, and everything will be different. Then comes the demon in the Capernaum synagogue. Mark 1:23 and Luke 4 both capture this moment. On the Sabbath, a man with an unclean spirit cries out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Something catches your eye in this scene. The demon knows exactly who Jesus is before anyone else does. Jesus silences it with a word: "Be quiet. Come out of him." The spirit convulses the man and leaves without injuring him. The crowd is stunned, not by the exorcism alone, but by the authority. Other exorcists in the ancient world used elaborate rituals, incantations, physical objects. Jesus just speaks. No formula, no props, just a command, and the darkness obeys. That same day, Jesus goes to Peter's house and heals Peter's mother-in-law of a high fever. Mark 1:29 tells us about it, and Matthew and Luke both mention it too. She gets up immediately, and begins serving them. The Greek word Luke uses for what she does is diono, and it's the same root word. That gives us deacon. Her response to being healed isn't just gratitude, it's ministry. She doesn't sit back and recover. She gets up and starts serving the people around her. That's a pattern you'll see throughout the miracles. Jesus heals, and the healed person becomes someone who serves. By evening, the whole town gathers at the door, and Jesus heals many who are sick and casts out many demons. Mark 1:32 describes the scene. Matthew sees in this a fulfillment of Isaiah 53:4. He took up our infirmities and bore our diseases. The prophet's words written centuries earlier are playing out in real time on a doorstep in Capernaum. Now the miracles begin to cluster, and each one reveals a different dimension of who Jesus is. A leper comes to Jesus. Matthew 8, Mark 1, and Luke 5 all tell this story. In first-century Judaism, leprosy made a person ritually unclean. Lepers couldn't enter the temple, couldn't participate in community worship, couldn't even live among their families. They had to cry unclean when anyone approached, a constant verbal reminder that they were outsiders. This man kneels before Jesus and says, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." And Jesus does something no rabbi would do. He touches him. Mark 1:41 says Jesus was moved with compassion, and the Greek word there, splanchnizomai, refers to a gut-level visceral response, something that grips you in your core and won't let go. It's not pity from a distance. It's the feeling of your insides turning over because someone else is suffering. Jesus says, "I am willing. Be clean," and the leprosy leaves immediately. Under Jewish law, touching a leper made you unclean, but when Jesus touches the uncleanness doesn't transfer to him. His cleanness transfers to the leper. That's a reversal of everything the purity system was built on. Then comes the paralytic lowered through the roof. You'll find this in Mark 2, and both Matthew 9 and Luke 5 record it too. 4 friends carry a paralyzed man to where Jesus is teaching, but the crowd is so thick they can't get in. So they climb the roof, dig through it, and lower the man on his mat right in front of Jesus. First-century roofs in that region were made of wooden beams covered with branches, reeds, and packed mud, so they literally tore through the ceiling. Mark says when Jesus saw their faith, and then he says something nobody expected, "Son, your sins are forgiven," and the order matters here. He forgives sins first. Before the healing, the man came for his legs. Jesus starts with his soul. He treats the invisible wound before the visible one. The religious leaders in the room are furious. Who can forgive sins but God alone? And Jesus knows exactly what they're thinking. He asks them which is easier, to say, "Your sins are forgiven," or to say, "Get up, take your mat, and walk." Then he heals the man specifically, so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. The physical healing is the proof of the invisible one. The body is healed, so you can see that something even deeper just happened. The healing of the man with the withered hand happens on a Sabbath. Mark 3 gives us the sharpest account, and Matthew 12 and Luke 6 included as well. The Pharisees are watching to see if Jesus will heal so they can accuse him. Jesus asks a devastating question. Which is lawful on the Sabbath? To do good or to do evil? To save life or to destroy it? They stay silent. Mark 3-5 says Jesus looked at them with anger, deeply grieved at their hardness of heart. Then he heals the man. The Sabbath, the day God set apart at creation for rest and renewal. Genesis 2, E's 2-3, was never meant to be a cage. It was meant to be exactly what Jesus is doing in it, restoring people. The Sabbath and healing aren't in conflict. They're the same impulse from the same God. Even now, let's stop and look at what's happened so far. Because the shape of something is becoming visible. Think about what Jesus has done in just this first wave of miracles. He's turned water into wine. Matter itself reshaped. He's healed a boy from miles away without being in the room. He's filled fishing nets to the breaking point. He's silenced demons with a single word. He's cured diseases no doctor could touch. He's forgiven sin, which only God can do. And he's redefined what the Sabbath is for, showing that it was always meant for restoration, not restriction. You see the pattern? He's not picking random problems to solve. He's reclaiming every corner of creation that sin and death and brokenness had touched. Sickness, spiritual oppression, material scarcity, social exclusion, religious rigidity. Every barrier between humanity and the life God intended is being dismantled one miracle at a time. And he's just getting started. If this is opening your eyes to something you haven't seen before, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Let's keep going. The next phase of miracles gets more intense. At the Pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem, John 5 tells us Jesus encounters a man who's been an invalid for 38 years. Archaeologists have actually uncovered this pool. It's a large dual basin structure near the Sheep Gate in Jerusalem, exactly where John places it. That matters because for a long time, critics said John invented the location. The stones say otherwise, but the real weight of this story is in the conversation. Jesus asks the man a piercing question. Do you want to get well? It sounds obvious, but it isn't. 38 years. That's longer than most people in the ancient world lived. This man's entire identity has been built around this pool, this spot, this waiting. Some people have carried their brokenness so long that letting go of it feels like losing part of themselves. The man doesn't answer the question. He responds with excuses. I have no one to help me into the pool. Someone else always gets there first. He's explaining why he can't be healed. Instead of asking to be healed, Jesus doesn't argue with him. He doesn't even address the excuses. He says, get up, pick up your mat, walk. And the man does immediately. 38 years of lying still, undone by 3 sentences. And notice what Jesus tells him to do with the mat. Pick it up. Carry it. The thing you've been lying on is now something you carry. You're no longer defined by it. Then Jesus calms a violent storm on the Sea of Galilee. Mark 4 gives us the most vivid version starting at verse 35. And Matthew and Luke both record it too. The disciples are terrified. The waves are swamping the boat, and Jesus is asleep on a cushion in the stern. That detail is easy to skip, but it's the only time in the Gospels where Jesus is described sleeping. The Creator resting in the middle of chaos. There's an echo of Genesis here, where the Spirit of God hovers over the formless, chaotic waters before speaking order into existence. The disciples wake him in a panic. Don't you care if we drown? Jesus stands up and speaks to the storm. The Greek word Mark uses here is phemu, and it means be muzzled. The same word used when Jesus silenced the demon in the synagogue. He speaks to the wind and sea the same way he speaks to unclean spirits with absolute authority. The sea goes flat, and the disciples are more terrified after the miracle than during the storm. Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. Psalm 89:9 says, You rule over the surging sea. When its waves mount up, you still them. Psalm 107, E's 28-29. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. He stilled the storm to a whisper. The waves of the sea were hushed. The Old Testament is crystal clear about who controls the sea. Only God does. The disciples' question, who is this, isn't rhetorical. They're starting to realize the answer is bigger than they imagined. On the other side of that sea, Jesus meets a man possessed by a legion of demons. Mark 5 gives us the fullest account, and Matthew and Luke record it as well. The man lives among the tombs, screaming, cutting himself with stones. No chains can hold him. Nobody in the community can help him. When he sees Jesus from a distance, he runs to him and falls at his feet. The demons inside him cry out, What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? But here's a detail most people fly past. When Jesus asks the demon its name, the answer is legion. That's not just a word. Meaning a Roman legion was a military unit of about 5,000 to 6,000 soldiers. In first-century Palestine, under Roman occupation, that word carried the weight of empire, oppression, overwhelming force. This man doesn't just have a spiritual problem. He describes it using the language of the most powerful military force on earth, and Jesus overpowers all of it with a word. Even here, in the most extreme case of spiritual bondage in the Gospels, the demonic forces recognize exactly who Jesus is, and no, they have no authority to resist him. Jesus sends the demons into a herd of pigs, which rush down the hillside into the sea and drown. The man, now clothed and in his right mind, wants to follow Jesus, but Jesus tells him to go home and tell his family what the Lord has done for him. The man who was the most broken becomes the first missionary. Two miracles happen almost simultaneously in the next scene, and the way they're intertwined is breathtaking. Jews, a synagogue leader, begs Jesus to come heal his dying 12-year-old daughter. Mark 5 tells the story starting at verse 22, and both Matthew and Luke included. As Jesus is walking to Jairus' house, a woman who's been hemorrhaging for 12 years reaches out and touches the edge of his garment. Mark 5:25 picks up her story. Under the purity laws of Leviticus 15, her condition made her ceremonially unclean, which meant she couldn't worship at the temple, couldn't be touched without making others unclean, couldn't participate in the normal rhythms of community life for 12 years. She spent everything she has on doctors. Nothing has worked. She's desperate enough to believe that just touching his clothing will be enough. And look at what she reaches for. The Greek word is kaspidon, the fringe or tassel of his garment. Numbers 15, Is 38-39 commanded every Israelite to wear tassels on their garments as a reminder of God's commandments. She doesn't just grab any part of his robe. She reaches for the part that represents the law of God, and the law that declared her unclean becomes the point of contact for her healing. Mark says Jesus felt Dunamis' power leave him. He stops. Who touched my clothes? The disciples think he's joking. The crowd is pressing in from every side. But Jesus knows this is different. The woman comes forward trembling and tells him the whole truth. Jesus says, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While he's still speaking, messengers arrive from Jairus' house. "Your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore?" Jesus overhears and says, "Don't be afraid. Just believe." When he arrives at the house, the professional mourners are already there wailing. Jesus says, "The child is not dead, but asleep." And they laugh at him. He puts them all out. Then he takes the girl by the hand and says in Aramaic, "Thalakum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." And she does. She's 12 years old, the same number of years the woman with the hemorrhage suffered. Mark weaves these two stories together on purpose. The woman spent 12 years dying while the girl spent 12 years living. Both are called daughter. Both are rescued by contact with Jesus, and in both cases, faith is the hinge on which the miracle turns. One reached out for him. The other had someone who reached out on her behalf. Either way, the connection to Jesus is what changed everything. After this, Jesus heals two blind men who follow him, crying out, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." You'll find this in Matthew 9:27. And then a man who's both mute and demon-possessed is brought to him just a few verses later in the same chapter. When the demon is driven out, the man speaks. The crowd is amazed. Nothing like this has ever been seen in Israel. But the Pharisees respond with an accusation that will shadow the rest of Jesus' ministry. It is by the prince of demons that he drives out demons. The same miracles that produce wonder in some produce hostility in others. It's a pattern that's been building since the withered hand on the Sabbath, and it won't stop until it reaches the cross. What makes the next two miracles so striking is the shift in scale. Jesus has been healing individuals one person at a time, close up, personal. Now he's about to do something in front of thousands that changes the entire conversation about who he is. The feeding of the 5,000 is the only miracle besides a resurrection recorded in all four Gospels. You'll find it in Matthew 14, Mark 6, Luke 9, and John 6. That alone should tell you how important the Gospel writers considered it. A massive crowd has followed Jesus into a remote area near Bethesda. The disciples see the problem. Thousands of hungry people and no food. Andrew finds a boy with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many? Jesus takes the food, gives thanks, breaks it, and distributes it, but he doesn't distribute it himself. He gives it to the disciples and makes them hand it out. He could have done it alone. He could have made bread appear in everyone's lap. Instead, he multiplies it through their hands. They become the delivery system for his provision. It's a picture of how he works. He provides, but he invites people to participate in the distribution. Everyone eats until they're full. And 12 baskets of leftovers are collected. 12, one for each tribe of Israel. Not a crumb wasted, not a person overlooked. But here's what makes this even wilder. About 800 years before Jesus was born, a prophet named Elisha did something similar. 2 Kings 4:42-44 tells us Elisha fed 100 men with 20 loaves of bread, and they were leftovers. Now Jesus feeds 5,000 with 5 loaves. In Exodus 16, God feeds Israel with manna in the wilderness. Jesus feeds a crowd in a desolate place. And in John 6:35, Jesus makes the connection explicit. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. He isn't just feeding them. He's declaring that he is what the man appointed. He is what the whole system of provision in the wilderness was always about. The bread in the wilderness kept you alive for a day. This bread gives life that doesn't end. That same night, Jesus walks on water. Matthew 14, Mark 6, and John 6 all tell this one. The disciples are rowing against the wind in the dark. Around 3 a.m., they see a figure walking toward them on the sea. They think it's a ghost. Jesus calls out, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." The phrase, "it is I," in Greek is ego eimi, which is the same construction used in the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures for God's self-identification. I am, Exodus 3:14. Jesus is walking on the water and using God's own name. Peter asks to come to him on the water. Jesus says, "Come," and Peter steps out of the boat. He walks on the water. Let that sink in. Peter, a fisherman, walks on the Sea of Galilee. He's the only human being besides Jesus who ever did that, even if it only lasted a few steps. Then he sees the wind, becomes afraid, and starts to sink. Jesus catches him. "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they climb into the boat, the wind dies. And Matthew records that the disciples worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Job 9:8 says, God alone treads on the waves of the sea. They're putting it together slowly, unevenly, but they're getting there. Okay, let's take a breath and look at where we are, because something remarkable has been building. In the first third of the miracles, Jesus proved his authority over every domain: matter, distance, nature, demons, disease, sin, and the Sabbath. In this second stretch, he's gone further. He's shown authority over hopelessness itself, healing a man who'd given up after 38 years. He's shown authority over chaos, muzzling a storm with the same word he uses on demons. He's broken a man free from the grip of a legion of evil. He's reversed death for a 12-year-old girl. He's fed thousands from nothing, and he's walked on the water that only God can tread. But there's something else happening that's just as important. The opposition is growing. The Pharisees accused him of working with the devil. The religious system is threatened. The miracles aren't just producing faith. They're producing fury, and that tension between the wonder and the hostility is going to drive the rest of the story. The miracles continue to expand in scope and diversity. Jesus heals a Syrophoenician woman's demon-possessed daughter. The woman is a Gentile, not Jewish, from the region of Tyre and Sidon in modern-day Lebanon. You can find this in Mark 7, starting at verse 24, and Matthew 15 tells it too. And that matters because up to this point, every miracle has happened within Israel. Now the healing reaches outside. The woman's faith, not her nationality, is what Jesus responds to. He heals a deaf and mute man, and the way he does it is unlike any other miracle. Mark 7:31 tells us Jesus takes the man away from the crowd privately. Then he puts his fingers in the man's ears, spits, and touches his tongue. Why the physical gestures? Think about it from the man's perspective. He can't hear. Words mean nothing to him. So Jesus meets him where he is and communicates through touch. He puts his fingers in the ears that don't work, as if to say, I know what's broken, and I'm about to fix it. Then he looks up to heaven, sigh, and says, Ephatha, an Aramaic word meaning be opened. That sigh is one of the most human moments in the Gospels. The Greek word is stenazo, and it describes a deep groan, the kind that comes from feeling the weight of someone else's suffering. Jesus doesn't heal from a distance here. He enters into the man's silent world before he opens it up. He feeds 4,000 people with 7 loaves and a few small fish, this time likely in gentile territory, with 7 baskets of leftovers collected. Mark 8 and Matthew 15 both record this one. Completeness, the full picture. Think about that alongside the earlier feeding. 12 baskets for the 12 tribes of Israel, 7 baskets for everyone else. The pattern is hard to miss. Jesus isn't just the Messiah of Israel. He's the Savior of the whole world. The bread is for everyone. He heals a blind man at Beta in stages. And this is the only miracle in the Gospels that happens gradually. Mark 8:22 tells it. After the first touch, the man says, I see people, but they look like trees walking around. Jesus touches his eyes again, and his sight is fully restored. Why the 2-stage healing? Mark places this story right between 2 moments where the disciples can see, but not clearly. They've witnessed the miracles, but they still don't understand who Jesus is. Peter's confession, you are the Christ, comes in the very next passage, Mark 8:29. The blind man's gradual healing mirrors the disciples' gradual understanding. Sight comes in stages, so does faith. A coin appears in the mouth of a fish to pay the temple tax. Matthew 17:4 has this one. It's a small miracle, but it tells you something. Jesus' authority reaches into the most mundane details of daily life. Then comes a boy with violent seizures caused by a demon that the disciples couldn't cast out. All 3 synoptic Gospels record this one. Matthew 17, Mark 9, and Luke 9. The Father's cry to Jesus is one of the most honest prayers in the entire Bible, I believe. Help my unbelief. Mark 9:4. When the disciples ask why they failed, Jesus tells them, this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting. Mark 9:29. There are levels of spiritual authority, and some battles require a deeper commitment than others. In Jerusalem, Jesus heals a man born blind by making mud with his saliva, placing it on the man's eyes, and sending him to wash in the Pool of Semeion. John chapter 9 tells the whole story. The Hebrew name shalok shalom comes from the verb shal, meaning sent. John loves this detail. Jesus, the one sent by the Father, sends the blind man to a pool whose very name means sent. But before the healing, the disciples ask a question that reveals how most people in the ancient world thought about suffering. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? John 9:2. It was a binary. Suffering is punishment. So whose fault is it? Jesus rejects the entire framework. Neither this man nor his parents sinned. This happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. That one sentence demolishes the idea that every hardship is a consequence of personal failure. Sometimes suffering isn't a verdict. It's a canvas. When the man washes, he sees for the first time in his life. The Pharisees interrogate him relentlessly. They interrogate his parents. They try to deny the miracle happened. But the man's testimony is unshakable. One thing I know, I was blind, but now I see. John 9:2. They throw him out of the synagogue. Jesus finds him afterward and asks, do you believe in the Son of Man? The man says, Lord, I believe, and he worships him. Jesus says, for judgment. I have come into this world so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind. John 9:39. The physical miracle is a living picture of what's happening spiritually. The man born blind can now see everything. The religious leaders who studied Scripture their whole lives, they're staring right at the Messiah and can't recognize him. Jesus heals a woman who's been bent over for 18 years. Luke 13:10 tells this one. She can't straighten up. 18 years of staring at the ground, unable to look anyone in the eye. Jesus calls her forward and says, Woman, you are set free from your infirmity." He lays his hands on her, and immediately she stands upright and praises God. The synagogue ruler is indignant because it happened on the Sabbath. Jesus calls him a hypocrite. "Doesn't each of you on the Sabbath untie your ox or donkey from the stall and lead it out to give it water? Then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath day from what bound her?" He calls her a daughter of Abraham. She isn't just sick, she's family. And the Sabbath is exactly the right day to set family free. The Sabbath was always about liberation from the very beginning. When God rested and called all of creation into rest with him, he heals a man with dropsy on the Sabbath. Luke 14:1 records this. He cleanses 10 lepers, but only one returns to give thanks, and that one is a Samaritan. Luke 17:1 tells this story. Now, to understand why that matters, you need to know that Jews and Samaritans had a centuries-old hostility between them. They didn't eat together, didn't worship together, didn't even walk through each other's territory if they could avoid it. 10 lepers cry out for healing. Jesus heals all 10, but the one who turns around falls at Jesus' feet and gives thanks. He's the outsider. He's the one everybody in the audience would have expected to keep walking. Jesus asks, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" The miracle happened to all 10, but only one let it change him. Gratitude reveals more about a person's heart than the miracle itself. Then comes the miracle that changes everything: the raising of Lazarus. John 11. Lazarus, a close friend of Jesus, is sick. His sisters Martha and Mary send word to Jesus, but Jesus deliberately delays 2 days before going to them. By the time he arrives, Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days. 4 days in the tomb. Not 1, not 2, 4. There's no ambiguity here. This isn't a coma. This isn't a near-death experience. Decomposition has started. Martha herself warns Jesus, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead for days." John 11:39. Lazarus is dead, and everyone knows it. Martha meets Jesus on the road. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Jesus says, "Your brother will rise again." Martha assumes he means at the final resurrection. Then Jesus says something no human being should be able to say. "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die." Do you believe this? At the tomb, Jesus weeps. John 11:35, the shortest verse in the English Bible, is also one of the most powerful. The Greek word is idokresin, and it describes silent tears streaming down the face. Right? He isn't weeping because he doesn't know what he's about to do. He's weeping because he sees the devastation that death causes, and it grieves him. Death was never part of the original design. It's an intruder in God's good creation. And standing at Lazarus's tomb, Jesus feels the full weight of it. He cries out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And here's something people have pointed out for centuries. He calls Lazarus by name, because if he just said, "Come out," without the name, who knows what would have happened to every other tomb in that cemetery. The command of the one who made life itself doesn't have a limited range. He has to aim it, and the dead man walks out still wrapped in burial cloths. Jesus says, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." This is the 7th and final sign in John's Gospel, and the placement is no accident. 7 is completion. The first sign was water to wine transformation. The 7th is death to life, resurrection. And look at what John tells us happened next. John 11, A's 47-53. The religious leaders held a council after this and decided that Jesus had to die. The miracle that proved he was the Lord of life is the very thing that triggered the plot to take his life. That's not irony. That's the pattern that runs all the way to the cross. Life comes through death. The final miracles cluster around the last days of Jesus' ministry. He heals blind Bartimaeus near Jericho. And you can find this in Mark 10:46 and Luke 18 as well. Bartimaeus shouts, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me," even though the crowd keeps telling him to be quiet. And then he does something that's easy to miss. Mark 10:50 says he throws off his cloak, jumps to his feet, and comes to Jesus. A blind beggar's cloak was everything. It was his blanket at night, his mat during the day, the thing he spread out for people to drop coins into. It was his entire livelihood. And he throws it off. He's not planning on going back to that spot. Betting everything on Jesus before the healing even happens. Jesus asks him, "What do you want me to do for you?" It's the same kind of question he asks the invalid at Bethesda. Jesus doesn't assume. He invites the person to name what they need. Bartimaeus says, "Rabbi, I want to see." Jesus says, "Go, your faith has healed you." And immediately he receives his sight and follows Jesus along the road. He curses a fig tree that has leaves but no fruit, and it withers. Mark 11 records this. This is the only destructive miracle in Jesus' ministry, and it's aimed at a tree, not a person. It's a living parable about religious appearance without spiritual substance, leaves that promise fruit but deliver nothing. The temple in Jerusalem looked magnificent from the outside, but inside it had become a marketplace. The fig tree and the temple cleansing are placed side by side in Mark's narrative for a reason. God isn't impressed by the appearance of spiritual life. He looks for fruit. And in his final healing miracle in the Garden of Gethsemane, as the soldiers come to arrest him, Peter draws a sword and cuts off the ear of Malchus, the servant of the high priest. Luke 22:51 says, Jesus touched the man's ear and healed him. Let that sit for a second. Jesus knows what's about to happen. He knows he's walking toward the cross. He's been sweating drops of blood in prayer just moments before, and in the middle of his own arrest, he stops to heal someone on the other side. Not a follower, not a friend, a man who showed up with weapons to take him away. His last miracle before the cross was mercy toward his enemy. That tells you everything you need to know about who he is. And then there's the resurrection, the miracle that validates every other miracle. The one Paul says our entire faith stands or falls on 1 Corinthians 15:14-17. If Christ has not been raised, Paul says our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. But he has been raised. The tomb is empty. The grave clothes are folded. The stone is rolled away. And Jesus, who calmed storms and raised the dead, and walked on water, and healed the blind, and fed thousands, and turned water into wine, walks out of death itself, not as a ghost, not as a spirit, but in a body his disciples can touch, a body that eats fish on the beach, a body that carries the scars. After the resurrection, he performs one more miracle, another miraculous catch of fish on the Sea of Galilee. John chapter 21 tells this one. The disciples fish all night and catch nothing. A voice from the shore says, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat." They do, and the net fills with 153 large fish. Why does John record the exact number? Scholars have been debating this for centuries, and nobody agrees. Augustine calculated that 153 is the sum of every number from 1 to 17, and that 17 equals 10. The commandments plus 7, the gifts of the Spirit. Jerome claimed ancient naturalists cataloged exactly 153 species of fish, making that catch a symbol of every kind of person being gathered in. Others have connected the number to Ezekiel 47, where the prophet describes living water flowing from the temple with fishermen lining the banks. And some scholars say the simplest explanation is the right one. Fishermen always counted their catch. And John, who was there, just recorded the actual number. The honest answer, we don't know why John chose to include it. But here's what we do know. The net didn't tear. John makes a point of telling us that in the earlier miraculous catch in Luke 5, the nets began to break. This time they hold. Everything Jesus provides after the resurrection holds together. It's the same lake, the same situation, the same command, and the same result. But this time Peter doesn't fall on his face in fear. He jumps into the water and swims to Jesus. He's been through the worst 3 days of his life. He denied Jesus 3 times. And now Jesus is making breakfast on the shore. The last miracle, recorded in the Gospels, isn't a cosmic display of power. It's fish on a fire and a Savior who makes breakfast for the friend who failed him. So what's the pattern? Here's what emerges when you lay every miracle end to end. Jesus begins by transforming the ordinary water at a wedding. He moves to healing individuals one at a time, close-up personal. He expands to commanding nature, storms and seas and bread multiplied. He raises the dead, and then he rises himself. Every miracle pushes the boundary, further than the last. And his miracles consistently break the barriers that separated people from God and from each other. He touches the leper that no one would touch. He heals on the Sabbath when the religious system said he shouldn't. He feeds Gentiles alongside Jews. He gives sight to a man the Pharisees say was born in sin. He raises a man who's been dead 4 days, well past the point anyone thought recovery was possible. Every miracle says the wall you thought was permanent, it isn't. And there's a thread running through every single one that's easy to miss. Jesus always sees the person before he does the miracle. He sees the woman who's been bleeding for 12 years. He sees the man at the pool who's given up. He sees the leper on the margins. He sees the bent-over woman who hasn't looked up in 18 years. He sees Bartimaeus when the crowd tells him to shut up. The power is stunning, but the seeing is what breaks your heart. Think about a guy who's been showing up to the same job for years. Every morning, same commute, same desk, same routine. And somewhere along the way he stopped expecting anything to change. He's not bitter about it, he's just settled. He fills his days the way those servants filled the stone jars, doing what's expected, going through the motions. Then one day someone asks him a question he hasn't heard in a long time. What would you actually want your life to look like? And he realizes he stopped asking that question years ago. That's the Pool of Bethesda. That's Jesus looking at the man who's been lying there for 38 years and asking, do you want to get well? Because sometimes the hardest part of a miracle isn't the power required to do it. It's the honesty required to admit you need it. The Jesus who turned water into wine is still in the business of taking what feels empty and filling it with something you didn't expect. Maybe you're staring at a situation right now that looks like 6 stone jars of ordinary water. A job that feels routine, a relationship that feels stuck, a chapter of life that feels like it ran out of wine a long time ago. The miracle at Cana says that's exactly the kind of situation he walks into. He doesn't need you to provide something better. He takes what's there and transforms it. Your part is what Mary told the servants. Do whatever he tells you. Obedience is the jar. He supplies the wine. And then there's something else hiding in all of this. Every miracle costs Jesus something. Mark 5:30 says he felt power leave him when the hemorrhaging woman touched him. He weeps before he raises Lazarus. He delays when people beg him to hurry. He heals the ear of the man who came to arrest him. And ultimately, the pattern of the miracles points to the cross, where the one who healed every sickness takes every sickness upon himself, where the one who cast out every demon faces the full darkness alone, where the one who raised the dead dies. The miracles aren't free displays of effortless power. They're acts of costly love. And the cross is where that cost reaches its fullest expression. But the cost doesn't end the story, because the resurrection proves that the power Jesus displayed in every miracle was real, enough to overcome the one thing that nothing else could touch. And there's one more thing. The miracles reveal that Jesus is never in a hurry, but he's never late. He waits 2 days before going to Lazarus, and the timing is perfect. He lets the storm rage until the disciples are desperate, and then he speaks. He lets the woman bleed for 12 years and the man lie by the pool for 38. And when he finally shows up, the healing is instant. If you're in a season where it feels like God is silent, the miracles tell you he isn't absent. He's working within a timeline you can't see yet. And when he moves, it won't be partial. It won't be half done. It'll be the kind of abundance that fills 12 baskets with leftovers. The miracles of Jesus taken together chronologically aren't a disconnected list of impressive events. They're God telling you who He is, written in flesh, one act at a time. Each one reclaims a piece of creation that sin and death and brokenness had stolen. And each one points forward to the ultimate miracle, the resurrection, where death itself is swallowed up and the Creator's original intention for the world is restored. That's the story the miracles tell when you line them up. Not random acts of power, not isolated church stories, a deliberate building. Revelation of who Jesus is and what He came to do. From water to wine to walking on water to walking out of a tomb. And it hasn't stopped, because the same Jesus who performed these signs is alive. He's interceding. He's working. And one day the final miracle will happen. The one Revelation 21:5 describes. Behold, I am making all things new. If this opens something up for you, help us get it to someone else. Subscribe to Deep Made Simple. Leave a comment. Even one word makes a difference, because that's how more people find this. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Pray for us. God bless you.